He poisoned me for years. I let him until the day I switched our cups. My name is Ruth. I am 83. My hands shake when I lift a kettle, but they remember. They remember the bitter tang on my tongue that did not belong in chamomile. The film that clung to the inside of the cup, like a guilt that would not rinse away. The careful way Harold watched me drink, and the careful way I learned to smile while swallowing what he wanted inside me. It began in quiet fits. A nausea that came and went with the color of the sky. A tremor. A sleeplessness that left my bones brittle and my thoughts slow. Doctors called it stress, age, grief. They drew blood and shrugged. I kept a little notebook in the drawer by the sink, and I wrote the dates of the dizzy spells. The nights my heart skittered like a moth. The mornings my gums tasted metallic. Tiny notes in a neat hand, written between grocery lists and knitting patterns. So Harold never looked twice. Harold liked to think of himself as practical. He wore sweaters with leather patches and lined up his pills like soldiers. He tended the herb bed as if it were a church, rosemary, mint, and a row of foxglove he called ornamental. An old story in my family said, foxglove looks like bells, the dead ring when they want to be heard. I never cared for stories until my tea began to taste like pennies. At first, I believed I was clumsy, that I had spilled cleanser into the kettle. Then I began to notice. Harold, after dinner, the ritual of it, the way he set my cup on the saucer with the smallest blue chip on the rim, and his cup on the white saucer with the hairline crack that caught light like a smile. The way he held his breath while I brought the cup to my lips. A held breath is louder than any accusation. He started watering the foxglove more than the others. He brought me magazines about heart health and muttered about my forgetfulness to the neighbor. He moved my pills. He said I had already taken them when they sat full in my palm. He switched the labels of the sugar and the salt and watched me taste. He wanted me confused enough to doubt my tongue. I learned the weight of cups in my hands, the difference between blue chip and white crack. I learned the shine of the kettle when it had been washed, and the dull smear when a spoon had stirred without my seeing. I learned that Harold could speak kindness and still stir death. I let him. I let the sickness lay down inside me like a lodger. I learned its footsteps. I kept drinking because I needed to know the measure. I needed to know how far he would go. There were nights I woke to the sound of him in the kitchen, a slow movement, a pause near the cupboard, the soft clink of porcelain, the tap running, the careful tilt of a bottle against steam. I learned to breathe easy and keep my eyes almost closed. I learned to cough into the back of my hand so he would fetch water and stand over me and memorize my weakness. One afternoon he came home with a supermarket pie and my favorite jam. He cut my slice thicker and watched me eat. Afterwards he brought tea, and he said the word darling like a leash. I sipped and smiled. He sipped and did not swallow. He set his cup down and touched and reached to adjust the throw blanket over my knees. His fingers brushed my wrist and took my pulse like a thief. In the bathroom that night, I pressed the soft of my thumb into the hollow of my arm and counted. It was a bird trapped under glass. I thought of Mary and Jonah. I thought of the day Harold had whispered through a door while he thought I slept, asking an agent about long-term policies, about payouts, about accelerated benefits if the illness was chronic and unremarkable. I did not want the law. The law asks for proof, measured with instruments. I had proof, measured with years. I began to teach myself a different ritual. I warmed water in a separate pot for myself in the morning, and I drank broth I made from leeks and bones. I hid the broth in a tea tin marked Earl Grey. Harold never liked Earl Grey. He said it smelled like perfume. I took tiny sips from the poison cup at night and poured the rest into the potted fern by the window. The fern browned along the edges. I trimmed the brown and left the green. When Harold asked why the fern looked ill, I told him it missed the sun. He moved it closer to the light. It did not recover. I wrote that down alongside my pulse. The dates lined up like fence posts. On Sundays, I went to church and sat beneath a window of blue glass, and I practiced quiet. On Tuesdays, Harold asked whether I had considered moving. He said the stairs were hard on me. He said a smaller place would suit. He said he would handle the paperwork. His voice carried that gladness men get when they can claim duty as a kindness. I said I was thinking. I let him choose the cup for me that night, and I let my hand drip. I let enough touch my mouth to keep his certainty fed, and I watched him grow bolder. He began to let the kettle boil longer. He brought home a new kettle. He bought spearmint and said it would calm my stomach. He smiled in photographs with neighbors and told them I was not myself. He left brochures from memory care folded open on the kitchen table. He circled numbers with a pen. I practiced walking the length of the hall steady and straight. As soon as he left, I practiced reading the smallest print on the back of a a soup can. I practiced pressing my tongue flat so it would not betray me when something bitter touched it. I learned to move slower than him and think faster than him. I learned not to correct him when he misremembered our anniversaries or the names of my friends. I learned to let him collect small proofs for a case he meant to win. The day I chose was an ordinary day, the kind that hides decisive things in its pocket. Harold spent the morning in the garden. He wore his straw hat and hummed tunelessly. The foxglove had grown tall, bells in 2 purple rows, pretty enough for a picture. I watched from the kitchen and polished 2 cups until they looked like patient faces. I placed the blue chip saucer at my place and the white cracked saucer at his. I set the kettle to boil, and when the water sang, I turned the flame low and set a second pot beside it with plain water. I left the kitchen and came back twice to make the pattern feel natural. I coughed once. Harold likes a show. He came in with soil under his nails and washed along. He dried his hands on the towel I keep for guests. He complimented my cardigan as if I were a visitor in my own house. He chose the jar from the back of the cupboard, the jar with the dried leaves he never named. He measured a pinch, his face careful, his shoulders easy. He poured the boil into my cup and the plain into his. He stirred mine with the spoon that lives in the drawer with the rubber bands. He left his untouched. On the table, I took my seat. I placed my fingers around the warm. Heat means light. I lifted the cup. I let the steam touch my face. Then I sneezed. A little sneeze the way old women sneeze. And I set my cup down to reach for the handkerchief. He stepped back a fraction. He does not like mess. I apologized and reached again. And in that reaching, I switched the cups. Blue chip for white crab. The movement so small it felt like a thought. I dabbed my nose. I smiled. I began to talk about the neighbor's cat and the way it keeps losing its collar. Harold nodded, pleased at the triviality of me. He lifted his cup. He drank. The first swallow made him blink. The second made him set the cup down as if the table had altered. He pressed his fingers to his throat as if he had forgotten what swallowing is. He looked at me for the first time in a long time, as if I were present. I lifted my cup. I sipped plain water. It tasted like the first day of school, clean and thin. He cleared his throat and stood. He stepped to the sink and ran the tap and cupped his hands and drank. He said that the tea was strong. I agreed. He went pale in the ears first, then the lips. He gripped the edge of the sink. I saw the tremor move up him like dawn in reverse. I counted. I thought of the fern. I thought of the notebook. I thought how once I had believed myself too gentle to keep track of such numbers. I do not keep speed dial. I keep a rotary phone on the wall because I like the way it insists on deliberation. I walked to it and dialed the neighbor. I told her Harold was unwell and asked if she might bring over the blood pressure cuff she is so proud of. I waited while the line rang. I described the weather. I kept my eyes on the cups, blue chip and white crab, still warm, steam still lifting like ghosts learning to stand. The neighbor said she would come at once. I thanked her. I hung up and fetched a towel. I laid it on the kitchen floor beside Harold's feet. In case he sat. He sat. His breath came fast. He asked me to call an ambulance. I told him the neighbor would be here any moment. The color in his face went the color of paper. He reached for my wrist. His hand felt both hot and very far away. He said my name. He said it like a person says a bridge they cannot cross. I held his hand lightly and told him to rest. The neighbor arrived with her cuff and her little bag of miracles. She wrapped his arm and frowned and told me to call for help. I took my time, careful with the numbers, careful with my breath. An operator asked for our address twice. Because I gave it softly, they told me to keep him still and comfortable. I did. I tucked a pillow behind him. I opened a window. I put the poison cup in the sink under a running stream. So the water ran, and the smell went away. Harold looked past me as if there were a ceiling he had never noticed. The siren grew from the distance like a memory getting closer. Later there were boots in the hall, voices that like to be obeyed, a stretcher, straps, professional hands moving him into a shape the world recognizes. Neighbors watching with arms crossed. I stood with my cardigan buttoned and my hands folded and my face set to the expression that is expected of women at the margins of men in trouble. At the hospital a nurse asked what happened and I said tea. He took ill during tea. A doctor asked what he had consumed and I said spearmint and hot water, which was true for me and almost true for him. They used words like arrhythmia and toxicity without choosing a noun. I watched Harold sleep under lights that make everyone the same color. I watched a monitor make mountains that rose and fell like someone else's landscape. I went home and washed the cups and put them in the high cabinet and took the fern outside and planted it where the soil was poor. It died completely in a week. Harold did not come home quickly. He returned with a new softness in his movements and a fear he could not hide. He did not go to the herb bed. He did not boil the kettle. He did not touch the jar in the cupboard. He asked if I wanted to move, and I told him I liked my kitchen. He said he would sell the house, and I told him the papers had my name in places he did not remember. He walked slower than me then. He slept in a chair some nights. He developed an allergy to the mirror. I kept my notebook in the same drawer, and on its last page I wrote the date of the day we swapped cups. I did not write victory or justice or ending. I drew a small cup and a smaller bell, and I closed the book. If you ask why I waited, if you ask why I learned the weather of my own suffering and tracked its seasons until the harvest, I would tell you I wanted him to know. That I knew. That I wanted the knowledge to ripen in him too. That I wanted the air between us crowded with his held breaths and my kept silences until the room itself understood. Love changes shape. Sometimes it becomes a room where one person keeps the light on so they can see exactly what the other is doing. Harold thought he lived with a shadow. He thought I would drift where he pushed. He thought I would sit and sip and fade. I sat and sipped and learned. And when the day came, I washed the cups. I dried them. I placed them high. I remember. And remembering is enough.